there's no telling what this elixir could do.
Yeah.
And the only details that we really get about what it could do is from Januk himself, where he is saying that the elixir could quench the soul for 1,000 years and give man skin as tough as petricite.
Both sounds negative to me, and that's the when he said that, didn't sound like points of selling. Like I wasn't sold on, okay, Januk, this is cool. Because first of all, quench the soul is one of those, it's almost like synergy or the cloud. It doesn't really mean anything. Welcome to Casuals of Runeterra, episode 157. I'm your host, Ryan, here with the other host, Edge.
Yeah, welcome to Casuals of Runeterra, where we still haven't figured out how to record. Like, where's the button?
Yeah, listen, every day is a new day here at Casuals of Runeterra. Despite over 100 hours recorded, it always feels fresh. But one thing that's not fresh is housekeeping. You can listen to us everywhere. Visit us at podcastcore.com for all of our info. Email us at podcastcore@gmail.com to get in contact with us. Remember, that's podcastcor. Follow us on all the platforms. We appreciate your help with helping us battle the algorithms. And then leave a like and comment wherever you listen. Word of mouth has gotten us this far. So tell a friend to always trust the ones you trust the least because of familiarity by listening to the Casuals of Runeterra podcast.
Huh?
What is it that the enemy you know is the friend, like the friend of...
I love how like you start. I love how like you start with like the adage, and then like you make it more complicated than it is, and that's where you get confused. That makes me feel so much better about how I handle puzzles, because I'm not good at puzzles because I overcomplicate them. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
There you go. That's the one. That should have been the cheese line for this episode. But I've been bumbling since we started. So let's just get into this episode where we talk about the story, the Curator's Gambit.
Yeah.
So Ezreal.
Go
ahead.
Yeah. I was jumping the gun, but so this is a story by Matthew Dunn.
Yeah.
And with this one, like, quick little disclaimer, like this is actually kind of a part 2 to his story, because there is another short story that predates this one that is the Elixir of Ulua or Uloa.
Yeah.
So there, if you want, you could go read the Elixir of Uloa, but that one is like just Ezreal actually acquiring the Sedek elixir, and it is very much just like the single scene from from Indiana Jones with him running from the boulder. That's literally that whole story.
You can just wait for us to cover it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we can cover it, but honestly, that would be like a 5-minute episode. I read this story. There's nothing.
I think our listeners would appreciate a short respite from our part 2s and our hour-long diatribe.
Yeah, like this is the respite. You go. He goes into a dungeon. He grabs this elixir and gets out. Like the interesting thing with that story is that it's all in first person, which this one is also in first person. So with the elixir story, it's definitely getting more of like Ezreal's thought process and kind of more of his own ego. But we get plenty of that in this story. So this one starts off with Ezreal being back in Piltover, and he is looking to make a deal with a man by the name of Januk. Januk is a red-bearded Freljordian transplant with deep pockets and big appetites. So we got ourselves a rich collector.
Yeah, that's an interesting description, and that's what got my attention, because Hetch and I will talk about this more, about our differing feelings on the story. But him being from Freljord and being successful in Piltover is rare. Most places you go in Runeterra in general, outside of Freljord, you don't run into many Freljordians.
Yeah.
That's something that's become more of, if you look at the timeline, that's more of a recent thing where essentially you have Freljordians immigrating.
Yeah, which I mean, like that could be kind of a side effect for all of like Ash's campaign, right?
Yeah.
Because Ash is looking basically to civilize the Freljord.
Mhm.
And once you are becoming more quote unquote civilized, your trade opens up more, which is why
Mhm.
we're probably seeing more Freljordians. But we never really got to see any outside of the Freljord that weren't like named champions. And the named champions that got any kind of notoriety out of Freljord, we haven't covered on this show yet, which is Olaf. And
Yeah.
Olaf is literally just trying to die. So could you imagine how difficult it would be to be a successful Freljordian following in those footsteps?
Yeah, yeah.
But
Understandable.
so yeah, this already has like a different feel to it because of Januk as a character. So it would be interesting to get more details on Januk. But for the sake of this story, we just know that he's a rich man who likes to collect, old world antiques. And Ezreal has worked with him before, but the details that we get from Ezreal is that uh he does like working with Januk. We worked well together, and he's only betrayed me twice. Well, 2.5 times. And yeah, and like with the 2.5 times, the halftime is where Januk blew his cover after they salvaged the wreck of the Echelon Dawn. So, like, they already have a history, and the history isn't that great. And so now we have the conversation where Januk is asking Ezreal if he has found the elixir of Uloa, which Ezreal has recovered. And he says that he liberated it from a trap-strewed hovel in the jungle near Peretha. So this is going to be out in like Ishtal.
Yeah.
So he traveled to Ishtal, delved into a dungeon, grabbed this elixir, and brought it back. And the only details that we get from Ezreal is that it looks to be pre-classical Shuriman. Uh, and we may or may not have covered one or two things about Shurima. And by one or two things, I mean a lot. We covered Shurima a lot. So pre-classical Shurima is when we have the Arisen all over the place and the Shuriman Empire stretching out basically throughout that whole southern hemisphere. So there's no telling what this elixir could do.
Yeah.
And the only details that we really get about what it could do is from Januk himself, where he is saying that the elixir could quench the soul for 1,000 years and give man skin as tough as petricite.
Both sounds negative to me, and that's when he said that, didn't sound like points of selling. Like I wasn't sold on, okay, Januk, this is cool. Because first of all, quench the soul is one of those, it's almost like synergy or the cloud. It doesn't really mean anything.
Hey, you can't say that, man. What about chicken soup for the soul?
So that's not getting me. And Petricite, we know the issues. We've spoken at length about Demacia. Listen to those episodes. Petricite causes more problems than it solves.
You say that, but as a true Demacian, I feel like to be able to guard myself from all magics is a plus, okay?
So yeah, I was not sold on this potion.
Yeah.
This elixir.
I mean, like, it's funny that you say that you're not sold on it, because then we get to where we're actually like starting to make the deal. And it turns out that the deal is that Ezreal would go and retrieve this elixir for 60,000. We don't get like what currency they're using, but it's
Bitcoin.
so yeah, it's Bitcoin. So 60,000 Doge coins and full accreditation to the guild, which would be the Piltover Explorers Guild, which is probably like Ezreal's actual goal.
His number one goal, yeah.
Yeah, and he even goes on at length to saying, just like, that's where I want to be. Like I have been kept out of a lot of places, but being kept out of that guild hurts a lot. So Jaduk is, kind of on the fence about it, but ultimately is just like, let me go to my study to receive the papers for your guild admission. And Ezreal even says, like, classic villain, where he's keeping the payment in the study. He's probably going to come back with a gun.
Yeah.
And while he's saying this to himself, he's killing the time by walking around in the dining quarters for Jaduk, because he likes to eat fine food surrounded by these fine antiques.
Yeah.
And while he's walking around, he notices classic villain. While Ezreal is walking around, he notices a bell, but the bell is different. Something's off, and it has some writing on it, and it's writing that he's never seen before, so he doesn't recognize it. Where Ezreal isn't like the most educated person, but he's more educated than the average person.
Yeah.
And he spends all of his time at the academy, because that's basically where he was raised, and out in ruins and stuff. So he just knows, like, if I haven't seen it, that's rare.
He knows enough to put himself in danger very often.
Yep, very often. All right. And so while he's looking at this bell, he hears a voice behind him, and it's Jaduk, and he says, "It's Aknud, the language of the dead, composed beyond the mortal veil, and spoken only by those in the afterworld." And that takes us to part 2, which is Ezreal turning around to see Jaduk pointing not one, but 2 guns at him.
Gotta change it up. And this is kind of the part in the story where I was having fun. I'm having fun with this, because if you've listened to our Ezreal, if you've listened to our Ezreal episode, shout outs, you're an OG, because it's been a while.
It's been a long time.
So it's good to come back to him. But Ezreal is kind of a mishmash of Tomb Raider and Indiana Jones, right? In a younger package. So the way his stories are set up, the way his interactions are set up, it's always this veil of fun. And I mean, I guess you could even throw some Nathan Drake in there. He's probably closer to personality Nathan Drake, but as far as the quest he goes on and things he does, that's closer to Tomb Raider, Indiana Jones style, since he does have an academic background. So all that being said is, I know what to expect from his stories. And this kind of back and forth shenanigans with him and a guy he doesn't trust, and little jokes with the 2 guns instead of 1. It plays like some campy James Bond interaction, right? So I'm all for it, and that's what kept me entertained, because it's not a long story either.
Yeah. And as far as like with that campiness and everything, like this goes back to, the jokes that we have of like Riot having good paint, because this is the definition of like an 89 Honda. All right. Like this is a story that we've seen time and time again. Whereas like for me, you were entertained by this point. I'm not that entertained. Like the only thing that I find entertaining is the fact that we're seeing a story that I've read 1,000 times through Ezreal's eyes, because Ezreal is a fun character. So like that's the silver lining for me. But, before I go and just spoil everything, let's, jump to the conflict, which is that Jaduk is now backstabbing Ezreal, and he's reveals that he is looking to get the elixir to bring back the Dreadlord. And Ezreal's just like, a Dreadlord? Great. And that's it. Like, Ezreal's just like, okay, yeah, like, I knew he was up to some BS, and now the BS is a Dreadlord. That sounds awful, and I want nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Whereas for us, because of all the lore that we've covered before, we've heard the term Dreadlord thrown around. We've also heard Aknud.
Yep.
And we've also know about the language only spoken in the afterlife. This is some Mordekaiser BS. Which also explains that, like, with the back and forth that Jaduk and Ezreal have been arguing about, of all the times they've backstabbed each other.
Yeah.
One of the ones that Jaduk threw in Ezreal's face was, "You left me to rot in a Noxian prison." This explains the Noxian prison.
Yep.
Because, you're trying to bring back like the IRA. No, we're not doing that. So this leads to their standoff, and they both pull the trigger at the same time. So Jaduk fires both guns Ezreal fires a blast from his gauntlet, and in Ezreal's words, it's magic versus bullets. Surprise, magic won. Magic always wins. And this takes us to a little bit of Sakuga, because we have Ezreal teleporting behind Januk, holding him at gauntlet point to the back of the head, like, haha, gotcha. And this is, for me, like, this gives like the vibes of like a Death Note version of Sakuga, because like they're both 3 steps ahead of each other.
Yeah.
So then it's like, so Januk is like, don't worry, I've already dropped my guns. What? Thrown through a table. And then it's like, you fool, you thought you had me. And then Ezreal's like, you're the fool. You drank that elixir? It's a fake. And then it's like, what have you done? And so as far as with the fake elixir, Ezreal filled it with a venom. And the venom that he put in there, of course I didn't add it into my notes, but it's a hornet venom that essentially works as a laxative.
Yep.
So he has drugged him with a laxative, and it's just like, hey, I wouldn't go too far from a toilet if I was you.
And he chugged the bottle.
Oh yeah, like Januk chugs the bottle because again he thought that he would become invincible, aka Petricite skin.
Yeah.
And so instead of Petricite skin, he now is about to just crap himself. I mean, he's doubled over in pain already. And Ezreal makes the flashiest escapes of all time, which is he blows a hole through the wall and then jumps out onto the rooftops of Piltover. And that takes us to part 3.
So this scene, this is where the campiness and me buying into it very early pays dividends, is because my favorite part is like where he puts the gauntlet to his head and he's like, oh shit, I forgot, he's Freljording. So the shortest he can be is 6'6". And he grabs his arm and slams him through a table. And it's just like, that little action sequence feels like a very Ezreal situation. And Ezreal doesn't really take any situation seriously because he does have the gauntlet, right? So it gives him an escape path, and he kind of lives for it in a sick way. So
I mean, we get it in his words.
Like when Januk left the room, he has what he needs. He can just leave. It's just that he is selfish to a point where Ezreal's ultimate goal at any point we've talked about him so far is to get into the guild, right? It feels like something he's been slighted for because of his age, because of his lack of connections, because of the pretentiousness of just Piltover society in general. So he believes like he's owed it and he'll get there no matter what he has to do. And this is another step in that. So everything fits in this story in a way that even though it's campy, even though it's fun, even though it's very referential to so many different properties we've seen millions of versions of, it still fits well. They do a great job of always fitting a puzzle piece into its place.
Yeah, and I like, as far as like the campiness and stuff, that's not where like I kind of turned off. It's just more of just like the story is very predictable.
Yeah.
Because we've read it we've read this hundreds of times at this point.
Yeah.
But like again, like the world of League of Legends is what makes it interesting, because like, so for me it's like I was more approaching it as like I want to get to the end of this so that we could have another story, because I want to see like the involvement that Ezreal like dives into. But before I get into those comments, let's wrap it up, because it does go to part 3, which is Ezreal now escaping Januk's place. He is running across the rooftops, and he's just kind of like thinking to himself as far as like, it's a pain in the butt that this went south. It was expected, but it still sucks.
Yeah.
Because, to counterpoint what you're saying of that Ezreal had what he wanted, he could have left. Ezreal didn't have what he wanted. He wanted access to the guild.
Yeah, true.
That the elixir doesn't matter. None of the antiques and Januk's place mattered to him at that point. It was like, I'm staying because there's a chance that I will get my recommendation to go to the guild.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm staying. But now that he's escaped and he's running away, he's like, well, I needed to get out of there because, well, that place is going to stink. Which is funny because he's, already making jokes about drugging Januk with a laxative to himself. And that, like, Ezreal's personality is definitely what carries these kinds of stories.
Yeah.
So that's already funny because there's a whole paragraph of him like making that joke. And he's like, yeah, but I also had to get out of there because I got a new toy. And it turns out he did take the bell. So he stole the bell has the Octud writing on it.
Very dangerous.
So not only does he have this elixir that that a Mordekaiser's follower is trying to grab. So nothing good is going to come from an item that Mordekaiser's followers want because, he deals in necromancy. That's scary crap. So not only does he have the elixir, which the necromancers want, but now he has this bell that is used by the necromancers clearly. And Ezreal's comments on it is like, yeah, I can't read it. But if I can't read it, I doubt anyone at the Explorers Guild seen this either. So this is my ticket in.
God damn it, Ezreal.
And that's where his story kind of leads off here because it's like it ends with Ezreal saying to himself of like, they have to let me in because they haven't seen this. And even if they've seen something like this, I just saved the world from a Dreadlord. So why would they not want to take me in? But it gives off like that air of like, this is just the prologue to the story, right? Like this is the opening scenes to his Indiana Jones movie of like, hey, I completed this quest to, get into the guild. They didn't let me in, but now I found this new toy and saved the world, where in reality, he's just made a bunch of really powerful enemies who, are still going to try to take over the world. And now they need to go get the bell back from him to do it.
Yeah.
That like, it has the building marks of the start of a good story. But for me, this isn't a good story. Like this is a story we've all read 100 times. And the only enjoyable parts of it is the League of Legends paint. But the story could be awesome if he has to go and like deal with a bunch of necromancers and then he has to go adventuring in Noxus to deal with them.
Yeah, it's very similar to if you listen to our last episode, we talked about Aurora and her story reads like a prologue as well. So I completely understand where you're coming from with this setup. And the interesting thing about it is that John may have diarrhea, but he's still alive. So he still has his connections. He still has his wealth. And that's going to lead to something more. And unfortunately, we have to wait for those stories to be written. That's the other part. Right? Because Ezreal's been around so long. He's had a couple stories. And one thing that's been a consistent theme, which is also very smart from the writing perspective, most of his stories, if not all of them, are first person because Ezreal is somebody who cares about him first, right? So he's going to tell you the stories. He's going to give you his viewpoint on it. It's always going to be through his lens. I think that's a neat approach to his storytelling.
So, I think it's definitely an important part of his storytelling because even though this is a story that I didn't enjoy that much, like the most enjoyable part is Ezreal's commentary.
Oh yeah, if this was narrated or like third person or whatever, it would be terrible.
It would suck.
Yeah, it would
it would just flat out suck if it wasn't in first person. But the fact that it's in first person is just like, like what is Ezreal
banter, your Spider-Man comments, you get the little bits and pieces that give it personality. And for people who are coming to this for Ezreal, they're giving you what you came for. They're giving you your cheeseburger, right? So that's props there. But yeah, to your point, you got me hype is with that setup. I want to read the story where and also I would want that story not to be a solo Ez story. I'm like, okay, it's been no time. Let's bring some other people into this. Let's have him cause some trouble for some other people.
There is no way that this could be a solo Ez story. Not only because of like, the having to throw in different regions because you gotta have, some threat from Noxus. But like one, I would want to know more about Januk. How the hell did a Freljordian end up with Noxian necromancers? How the hell does that happen? There is a very simple answer as to how that happens. As readers, we know this. No one else in the world knows it. Black Lotus. So like Ezreal could just end up stumbling upon a hornet's nest that he never had an intention of stumbling into. And who knows what kind of agents he has to run into at that point. Like, does he run into like LeBlanc herself? Does he run into some other powerful, members of the Black Lotus? Who does he end up working with, because he's accidentally stumbled into this much bigger conspiracy than he thought? who does he end up stumbling into that's also working it from a completely different angle with completely different goals, right?
Yeah.
Because I could see him like, just I could see him like running into LeBlanc, uh, and like LeBlanc using like her ties in Noxus to maybe sick like Talon on him,
Yeah.
and then it's like, oh well, crap, I might die. This might be the end of me. And then instead of him dying, he narrowly escapes and is saved by another champion, someone who probably doesn't get along that well with the Black Lotus. I don't know, maybe like Swain.
Yeah,
Like
and
it could open a lot of doors.
yeah, what tends to be an effective plot device for these type of characters that live life, loosely, in this adventurous style, is to put them in a situation where you force them to be serious or force them into serious situations. Whether Ezreal ends up getting someone killed or ends up doing something that doesn't only affect his well-being, that takes him outside of the narcissism for a second and puts him in a very real-world situation, because what they have given him in the story is some good meat, is that you have this necromancy bell that's attached to a very serious order that's trying to bring back a very serious being who's trying to come back for the third time. This
Yep.
and who we've already said, if you listen to our previous episodes, might be the next catalyst event to rival that of a why am I blanking? A Ruination type situation, right? Yeah.
Right.
Like, we're looking at the next step for Riot in their overarching big bad situation. They're Galactus, they're Thanos, whatever. Mordekaiser might be that guy. He's doing interviews at the moment. I don't know what round he's in, but we'll see sooner or later.
Yeah, like and like again, like we talk a lot about like putting the paint on old car to make it look good, but you've got good paint, so it's gonna look good. And like this is a way to like start off in the beater car with good paint and then really build into something that's a lot nicer than what you started with. Because could you imagine like the different kinds of banter of like Ezreal getting saved from the Black Lotus by like Swain, and then Swain being like, "Look, there's no way that Ezreal is going into Noxus legally, just off of who he is as a character." So then Swain would be like, "Hey, I've got enough here to have you executed, but I also don't want Mordekaiser coming back. So to stay your execution, you can come help me for a bit." And then Ezreal, helps him for a bit, but he's Ezreal, finds his way out of there.
Yeah.
Somehow, and then it's like, okay, I need to get as far away from Swain now before he figures out how I got away. Let me run over to this side of the battlefield. Oh God, what are these Demacians about?
And just Ezreal hopping from town to town.
And just Ezreal hopping from town to town, trying to cover up his own messes.
Just constantly digging a hole.
Yep. Could you see him? I could see him getting imprisoned by Swain to deal with the Mordekaiser threat, and then escaping Swain to then get imprisoned by a bunch of mage seekers.
Yeah.
And then it's like, what do you do when you're surrounded by Petricite and your gauntlet can't get you out of trouble?
Yeah, it's there's an endless amount of things to do there with his motivations. And I could definitely see, a couple stories down the road, an Ezreal with sunken, tired eyes in a dark Shuriman tomb. Like, what the fuck? How did I get just the constant adventure? All to bring him back to Piltover in some more significant, older way. Because with this, I don't think we talk much about it. We'll wrap this episode up soon, we promise. We just like to yap. I'm interested to see what an older Ezreal is, right?
Yeah.
Like, aging in this store in Runeterra overall, something we don't really touch on too much about characters over longer periods of time. Characters that aren't like demigods or celestials or whatever. So it would be, because he's still young, he's still in this very rambunctious, all over the place, but a older Ezreal, as we've seen in stories like Tomb Raider, Indiana Jones, the Uncharted series, as a character grows up and gets more experience, they become a really cool character, right? Like a really cool, well-rounded character.
And I feel like that is a direction that we could go, because we've gotten to see that, because like you said, there's not a lot of examples of that in Runeterra.
Yeah.
And the example that we have is really the most recent one, which is thanks to Arcane, we got to see a more adult version of Jace.
Yeah.
But that version was more retroactively of seeing how we got Jace to get to this point, because Arcane gave us the younger version.
Yeah.
And it's nice to see that for Jace, because obviously the Victor example isn't a fun one, because he goes full machine.
Yeah.
That's not growth.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny you mentioned Arcane, because it's unfortunate that we expect Arcane is so good that us personally, we immediately wanted every character to show up. Right? We want everybody to come to Piltover and to get that treatment, because they did so well with Jace, with Victor, with Caitlyn, with Vi, with Jinx, going from Powder to Jinx and all that, showing us a time frame which is one of the better handled time skips in much of media. So having Ezreal feels like, okay, that would be cool to see him on that path, because we don't have any expression of a full grown Ezreal, and we know what to expect, because the well they went to is a very well-worn one when it comes to the personality choice for Ezreal. Yeah. So we're like, oh, we know the story, and it's still a good one. So let's see what you do with it with League of Legends paint.
Exactly. Yeah. And so this story does leave a lot to be excited for, but the story itself doesn't leave me excited for it.
Yeah.
But that's just my 2 cents on it. If you have a different opinion on it,
let us know.
Let us know. podcastcore@gmail.com. Let us know if I'm an idiot.
It's very rare.
I can take it.
Yeah, it's very rare Hetch and I aren't on the same page on this type of stuff. So it's very exciting. So definitely let us know what you think. And I know we've given you back-to-back prologues, but don't worry. Soon we'll have some more meat on an episode where it's an actual, straight up story.
Every now and then you'd have to have a plant-based meal.
Yeah, right? Exactly. You gotta eat your veggies.
So we're eating our veggies now so that we can pig out later.
Yeah, and we've given you over 200 episodes. Okay, so don't you dare listen here, Missy.
Just start yelling at these grateful fans.
So with that, as always, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for letting us yap. Thanks for listening.
If you listen to all of our yapping, we really do appreciate it. All jokes aside, this is why we do it. It's not just because it's fun, but for you guys to listen to it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and we'll be back soon with the next episode.
Yeah, take care, everybody.